The fire took everything sending, except my life, crawled out alone through smoke and...
I always believed loyalty was everything, so I said it out loud whenever Ryan laughed at me. "You trust too easy," he said, tapping the table. I answered, "Trust keeps families alive." Laura squeezed my hand and smiled. "That's why I love you," she said. Dinner felt warm, safe, loud with small jokes. I told them, "The house is ours, the papers are in the drawer." Ryan nodded. "I've got your back." I believed him. I believed every word, because believing felt easier than doubting people I loved. That night I thought nothing could ever break us. I was wrong. "Eat more," Mom said softly. I laughed and said, "I'm full." Ryan poured wine and asked, "Still signing the expansion deal tomorrow?" I nodded. "All the documents are ready." Laura said, "You worked so hard." I replied, "I did it for us." Ryan leaned closer. "You trust me with the copies, right?" I hesitated, then said, "They're in my office." Laura's smile twitched. I ignored it. I told myself love didn't question small moments like that. Later, plates were cleared, laughter faded, and silence slowly replaced comfort. I missed every warning sign standing right in front of me. That night, after dinner, Laura kissed my cheek and said, "I'll clean up." Ryan said, "Come talk business." In my office, he asked, "You ever worry about risk?" I shrugged. "If we stick together, we win." He smiled without warmth. "You're lucky." I laughed. "I know." He held the folder and said, "I'll keep this safe." I nodded. My chest felt tight, but I said nothing. Trust felt heavy, but silence felt safer. I watched him leave, telling myself brothers never steal from brothers. Laura laughed in the kitchen, and I chose comfort over doubt. That choice followed me forever. Into fire. Late that night, Laura climbed into bed and whispered, "You okay?" I said, "Just tired." She traced my arm. "We're lucky." I replied, "I know." She paused. "If anything happened, you'd trust Ryan, right?" I frowned. "Why ask that?" She laughed. "Just thinking." I turned away, heart racing. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself love didn't come with fear. I fell asleep believing lies felt better when shared. The house was quiet, holding secrets I wasn't ready to face. Smoke would teach me truth before morning arrived. I never woke up the same man again. Ever. I woke choking, heat screaming against my skin. I shouted, "Laura." No answer. Flames cracked the hallway. I ran barefoot, yelling, "Ryan." Smoke burned my eyes. I grabbed the door handle and screamed, "Help." The ceiling groaned. I fell, crawling, coughing. "Please," I gasped, "please." The house roared like it hated me. I thought, this is how I die. I smashed a window and rolled into cold air, shaking, broken, alive. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, but none came close enough fast. I lay coughing, staring at flames eating my life. That was when I saw them standing together silently. Watching. Ryan held Laura's shoulders. Laura clutched his shirt. I called, "I'm here." They didn't move. I said, "Why aren't you calling my name?" Laura whispered something I couldn't hear. Ryan stared at the fire, not me. I dragged myself forward. "I'm alive," I said. No answer. In that moment, smoke hurt less than understanding. Something inside me burned down completely. I passed out knowing the fire didn't take everything. Trust died first. The night swallowed my screams and kept their silence safe. I would remember their stillness longer than the pain, even after waking, in hospitals and nightmares. Forever burned. I didn't know it then, but that fire changed my name inside my head. I wasn't a brother or a lover anymore. I was a survivor. As darkness closed in, one thought stayed clear. I trusted them, I told myself. The flames answered with silence. When my eyes closed, I felt cold and alone. The night took my home, my future, my faith. It left me breathing. That would be enough to start something darker, stronger, and far more patient. This was only the beginning, and I would survive what came next. Even if it hurt everything I still loved. I woke up to a steady beep and a voice saying, "Easy, don't move." I whispered, "Where am I?" The woman leaned closer. "Hospital. You're safe." I tried to sit up and groaned. "Fire," I said. She nodded. "I'm Grace. I'm your nurse." I swallowed and asked, "Did my house burn?" She hesitated. "Yes." I closed my eyes. "Did anyone else get hurt?" She said softly, "Just you." My chest tightened. I whispered, "That's not possible." Grace touched my arm. Rest. But my mind wouldn't stop replaying flames and silence. I asked, how long was I out? Grace said, 2 days. I laughed weakly. Figures. She asked, do you remember what happened? I said, I trusted people. She didn't ask more. She just said, a detective will visit. That word scared me. Why? I asked. She replied, routine. I stared at the ceiling, hearing crackling fire in my head. I told myself it was an accident. I repeated it like a prayer. Accidents happen. People don't plan fires. People don't watch you burn. I clung to that lie because the truth felt too sharp to hold. Detective Moore arrived with a calm voice. Ethan Walker? I nodded. He said, I'm sorry for your loss. I asked loss. He paused. You're home. I said, what do you need? He asked, were you alone? I answered, yes. He asked, anyone have access to the house? I said, family. He wrote something down. Any enemies? I laughed. No, he studied me. The fire was ruled accidental. Relief washed over me. Then he added, but some things don't add up. My stomach dropped. Like what? He said, missing documents. I frowned. What documents? He said, property and business files. I shook my head. They were in my office. He asked, who knew that? I said, Ryan. I stopped talking. The room felt colder. Moore said, your brother? I nodded. He closed his notebook. We'll talk later. After he left, Grace asked, you okay? I said, I don't know. I stared at my bandaged hands and whispered, something's wrong. She didn't argue. She just said, you're not alone. I wanted to believe her. I really did. Ryan and Laura came that afternoon. Ryan smiled too fast. Hey, little brother. I said, you look fine. Laura hugged herself. I was so scared. I asked, you didn't get hurt? She shook her head. We were out. I said, out where? Ryan cut in. Dinner. I stared at him. At midnight. He shrugged. Late night. Laura said, please don't stress. I said, the fire was called accidental. Ryan nodded quickly. Good. Too quickly. Laura wouldn't meet my eyes. I said, did you save anything? She whispered, no. Daniel visited next. He sat close and said, I'm glad you're alive. I said, what happened to the deal? He swallowed. That's complicated. I said, say it. He sighed. Ownership shifted. I laughed. That's impossible. He said, there were signed papers. My heart pounded. By me. He nodded. They were legal. I said, I didn't sign anything. He looked away. They had your signature. I felt sick. Who brought them? He said, Ryan. The room spun. I whispered. No, Daniel said. I didn't know. I waved him away. Leave. He hesitated. I'm sorry. I closed my eyes. So am I. Grace returned later. She asked, want water? I said, tell me I'm wrong. She paused. About what? I said, about people. She said gently, sometimes fires show truth. I snapped. It was an accident. She didn't argue. She said, rest. My mind screamed. I replayed dinner. Smiles. Questions. Silence. I told myself coincidence explained everything. That was easier than betrayal. I whispered. Ryan wouldn't. Grace squeezed my hand. Sleep. I pretended to obey, but my ears stayed open. Fear has sharp hearing. Voices leaked through the door that night. Laura's voice cracked. I didn't mean for him to wake up. Ryan said, lower your voice. She sobbed. What if he remembers? Ryan said he won't. My heart froze. Laura whispered, I can't do this. Ryan replied, you already did. I held my breath. Laura cried, I loved him. Ryan said, then stop crying. Silence followed. I stared at the ceiling, tears burning worse than fire. I finally understood. Accidents don't whisper outside hospital doors. Ashes don't lie. I signed myself out early. The doctor said, you need more time. I said, I need answers. He sighed. Against advice. I nodded. I know. Grace asked, where will you go? I said, home. She looked at me. You don't have one. I replied, I'll find something. She lowered her voice. Be careful. I said, I've already been burned. She didn't smile. I walked out with shaking legs and a clear head. Pain was easier than not knowing. Truth felt close, heavy and slow, like heat under ash. I called Mark from the parking lot. We need to talk. He said, You should rest. I said, now. Silence. Then, fine. We met at a quiet diner. He stared at his coffee. I said, look at me. He didn't. I said, you've been avoiding me. He whispered. I didn't know how. I leaned forward. Say it. He shook his head. You won't like it. I said, I already don't. His hands trembled. Ryan came to me weeks ago. My chest tightened. About what? He swallowed. Insurance. I said, explain. Mark said, he asked questions. I asked, what kind? He replied, about payouts. About fire. My voice rose. Fire. He flinched. Laura was there too. I laughed once. You're lying. He slammed his cup down. I wish. I whispered. Why didn't you tell me? He said, he's your brother. I snapped. And I was your friend. He looked up, eyes red. They planned it. My ears rang. Planned what? He said, everything. I stood up. Say it. He said, the fire. I sat back down, shaking. I asked, they didn't know I'd be inside? He closed his eyes. They knew. I whispered, they tried to kill me. He nodded once. They thought you'd be asleep. Rage flooded me. And you did nothing? He said. I was scared. I laughed, sharp and broken. So was I. He reached out. I'm sorry. I pulled away. Sorry doesn't unburn a house. Silence filled the booth. Finally, I said, why tell me now? He said, because they're fighting. I frowned. About what? He said, money. That hurt worse. I paid and walked out without looking back. I drove to my mother's house. She opened the door and said, you look thin. I said, Ryan planned the fire. She frowned. Don't say that. I said, he tried to kill me. She grabbed my arm. Stop. I pulled free. You knew something. She shook her head. He's under pressure. I said, so I deserve to burn? She cried. He's your brother. I said, and I was your son. She whispered, let it go. That sentence broke me. I stared at her and felt empty. You already did, I said and walked away. Outside, my phone buzzed. A message from Laura. We need to talk. I deleted it. Another from Ryan. Hope you're recovering. I laughed aloud. People walked past me, normal and alive. I realized no one was coming to save me. Not my friend. Not my mother. Not the law. I sat on the curb and breathed. Anger screamed for action. Fear begged for safety. Something colder answered both. Patience. I said out loud, I won't confront them. A man passing looked at me strangely. I didn't care. I felt calm for the first time. That night, I sat alone in a cheap motel. I replayed every smile, every question, every pause. I saw patterns I ignored. I whispered. I was blind. Shame burned slow, deeper than anger. I punched the wall once and stopped. No, I told myself. Not like this. I opened my laptop and started reading. Insurance. Timelines. Paper trails. I smiled without joy. Let them think I'm weak, I said. The truth burns slower, but it burns cleaner. I would let their lies eat them alive. I turned off the light knowing my choice was made. I wouldn't chase them. I would wait. I vanished on purpose. My lawyer said, let them believe you're unstable. I said, good. He asked, you sure? I replied, they already think I'm dead. Papers labeled me fragile, unfit, unreliable. Ryan took everything. Laura cried on television. I watched clips and said, keep acting. Daniel met me at night and whispered, I can help. I asked, why? He said, because this is wrong. I nodded. Then listen. We worked quietly. I let the world believe I lost. Silence became my weapon. Daniel asked, you want revenge? I said, I want truth. He slid documents across the table. Start here. I read and said, Ryan's deals are sloppy. Daniel smiled. Greed rushes people. I recorded calls and saved emails. Detective Moore met me once and said, off the record. I said, always. He added, they're nervous. I asked, enough? He said, soon. No promises. Just facts. I liked that. I asked myself, is this who I am now? The answer waited. Laura went public. She said, I lost everything. I laughed quietly. Ryan blamed stress. Investors left. Daniel said, karma moves slow. I said, let it. I struggled at night. Revenge poisons, I told myself. Another voice said, justice heals. I chose patience. I chose watching. Ryan yelled at Laura in a restaurant. Someone sent me video. Laura screamed, "You promised." Ryan shouted back. I muted it. Proof didn't need sound. I saved it anyway. Moore called me late. "Your brother's company failed another audit." I asked, "Paperwork?" He said, "Forged signatures." I replied, "Mine?" He paused. "Looks like it." I smiled without joy. Daniel asked, "Meet him?" I said, "Not yet." Laura posted a tearful apology online. Comments turned cruel. Daniel said, "She's cracking." I answered, "Cracks show truth." I stayed quiet. Silence let lies talk too much. Every day they fell louder. Every day I stayed small on purpose. Ryan called at midnight. I ignored it. He texted, "We should talk." I deleted it. He called again. I answered. "What?" He slurred, "You alive?" I said, "Barely." He laughed. "Same." I asked, "What do you want?" He said, "Meet me." I replied, "Why?" He whispered, "I messed up." I said, "That's not new." He begged, "Please." I hung up. Daniel looked at me. "You okay?" I said, "He doesn't know." Daniel asked, "Know what?" I replied, "I already won." I met Ryan at the bar he chose. He laughed when he saw me. "You look rough." I said, "So do you." He ordered drinks and said, "To survival." I didn't touch mine. I said, "Why did you call?" He shrugged. "I miss my brother." I leaned closer. "Brothers don't light fires." His smile froze. "You're still on that?" I said, "You used gasoline near the back stairs." He blinked. "What?" I added, "You thought it would trap me." His hand shook. "You're guessing." I replied, "You panicked when the smoke alarm failed." Silence swallowed us. He whispered, "You don't know anything." I said, "You parked 2 blocks away." He laughed too loud. "Prove it." I said, "You forgot the cameras." His face drained. "You're bluffing." I said, "You used my signature twice." He slammed his glass down. "Stop." I said calmly, "You never meant for me to live." He stared at me like a stranger. "You're sick." I smiled slightly. "That's what you told everyone." He stood. "I'm leaving." I said, "Run." He didn't look back. I stayed seated and breathed. Laura cornered me outside. She grabbed my arm. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, "Doing what?" She cried, "Destroying us." I said, "You did that." She shook her head. I was scared. I replied, "So you burned me?" She sobbed, "I loved you." I felt nothing. Love doesn't watch. She fell to her knees. "Please." I stepped back. "Talk to the police." She screamed my name. I kept walking. Her tears sounded distant, like rain on glass. I realized numbness was peace. I didn't hate her. I didn't care. Detective Moore called the next morning. "It's time." I said, "I know." He asked, "Ready?" I replied, "Do it." Papers moved fast. Insurance flagged everything. Forensic reports confirmed accelerants. My signature proved forged. Moore said, "Your friend Mark will testify." I said, "He will break." Moore replied, "He already has." Courtrooms echoed with words I never spoke. Mark cried. I should have stopped them. I stared straight ahead. My mother sat behind me, shaking. She whispered, "I didn't know." I didn't turn around. Ryan shouted when officers approached. "This is a mistake." Moore said, "Hands up." Ryan looked at me. "You did this." I answered, "You did." Laura collapsed as cameras flashed. Reporters yelled questions. I walked past them. Moore said, "You okay?" I said, "I'm breathing." He nodded. "That's enough." Ryan fought the cuffs. "Ethan," he screamed. I finally looked at him. "You chose this." He screamed my name again as they dragged him away. I stood still. No smile. No victory. Just air filling my lungs at last. The lawyer said, "Your brother accepted the plea." I asked, "How long?" He replied, "Years." I nodded. "Okay." He waited. "That's it." I said, "That's it." Laura's name appeared next. The lawyer added, "She's finished socially." I asked legally. He said, "No charges." I said, "That fits." After the call, I sat alone and said out loud, "I thought this would feel better." It didn't. Revenge didn't heal anything. It just closed a door. I breathed and let that truth stay. It didn't hurt as much as I expected. Laura sent letters. Daniel brought them. "You want these?" I shook my head. "No," he asked, "ever?" I said, "They're not for me." He hesitated. "She's sorry." I replied, "So am I." He placed the letters in a drawer. "Your call." I said, I already made it. Silence followed. I realized silence no longer scared me. It felt earned. Daniel smiled slightly. You're different. I said, I survived. He nodded. That counts. We talked numbers, contracts, quiet rebuilding. No announcements. No revenge speeches. Just work done cleanly. Grace met me for coffee. She said, You look stronger. I laughed. I feel lighter. She asked, still angry. I answered, sometimes. She nodded. That's honest. I said, I don't want to become them. She smiled. You didn't. I looked at my hands. Scars stay. She replied, so does choice. I asked, does it ever stop hurting? She thought. It changes. I accepted that. We talked about normal things. Weather. Books. Sleep. For the first time, I felt human without pain leading the conversation. The business came back slowly. Investors returned quietly. Daniel said, they trust you. I said, they trust silence. He laughed. That too. I signed papers with steady hands. No rush. No fear. When someone asked, how did you recover? I said, by letting go. They didn't understand, and I didn't explain. Understanding wasn't required anymore. Control was. My mother called once. She said, I'm sorry. I replied, I know. She cried. I listened. Then I said, I need space. She whispered, I understand. That was enough. One evening, Daniel asked, do you forgive him? I shook my head. No, he waited. I added, forgiveness isn't required to move on. He smiled. You're right. I stood and said, I need to go somewhere. He asked, where? I said, home. The word felt strange. The house stood rebuilt, quiet, clean, unfamiliar. I held the old key in my hand. Grace's words echoed. Choice. I stood there a long time. I didn't know if I wanted to go inside. For once, not knowing felt peaceful. I stood in front of the house and said, this is the last time. No one answered. I stepped inside and whispered, I remember everything. The walls were clean, new, unfamiliar. I said, you don't know me anymore. My footsteps echoed. I walked room to room and talked to ghosts. We laughed here. Silence. We planned futures here. Silence again. I stopped in the hallway and said, you burned this place, not me. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. Strength arrived quietly, like breath returning after smoke clears. I picked up a chair and Saturday. I trusted too easily, I said. But that doesn't make me weak. I stood and added, it made me human. I walked to the door and locked it. The sound clicked final. I placed the key on the floor. I don't need you, I said to the metal. Leaving felt right. Outside, the air felt lighter. I breathed deeply and said, I survived. Saying it once wasn't enough. I said it again. I survived. That was the truth I kept. I drove until the city disappeared. At the ocean, I sat on the sand and listened. Waves spoke without lies. I said, you tried to drown me once. The water answered calmly. I laughed softly. Not today. Smoke from my memory drifted away with the wind. I said, I didn't crawl out for revenge. The waves rolled closer. I crawled out to live. That sentence settled inside me like peace. I watched the horizon and let the past stay behind me where it belonged. My phone buzzed once. I didn't check it. I said, regret isn't my responsibility. I thought of Ryan and felt nothing. I thought of Laura and felt nothing. That emptiness wasn't cold. It was clean. I spoke to myself. Pain taught me my worth. I nodded. I won't forget, but I won't carry it. The ocean kept moving forward. So would I. I stood and brushed sand from my hands. This is enough, I said. And for the first time, I believed it completely.